Greg is coming to us tonight. He's the founder and senior pastor of Woodland Hills Church in Maplewood, Minnesota. He's the president of Renew Ministries. Of course, he doesn't know how to spell. It's Renew with a K, Re-Canoe. And the byline for this ministry is, it is a ministry that boldly rethinks everything Christians have always assumed they already knew. He gained a PhD from Princeton Theological Seminary in 1987. He taught at Bethel University for 16 years and continues there as an adjunct professor. He is a well-known theologian, preacher, teacher, apologist, author, 20 books. And the most recent book he's here to talk about the concept tonight called The Benefit of the Doubt. He is a leading spokesman for the growing Neo-Anabaptist movement. He is a noted Christian anarchist, known for his writings on the relationship between Christianity and politics. He has significant works on epistemology, apologetics, defending the historicity of the New Testament accounts of Jesus. He's a leading proponent of open theism. That is a concept that has triggered probably the most significant controversy about the doctrine of God in the evangelical thought in recent history. It's been quite a contribution to thinking. Now, Greg, I always thought Greg was cool, and then I found out he's a rock and roll drummer. Yeah, so he's really cool to some, huh? The band is called Not Dead Yet. Maybe you'll explain that. And the proceeds of that band go to raising money for women in Haiti. He's a competitive race walker, so don't try walking beside him. He's married to his wife of Shelley for 36 years, 3 children, 5 grandchildren. And he comes to this conference to talk about the danger of certainty-seeking faith, something I really look forward to. He's addressing the false assumption that a person's faith is as strong as a person is doubt-free. It's a false assumption, he's going to tell us, and he takes on the concept that the experience of doubt is inherently sinful and the experience of psychological certainty is inherently virtuous. Greg, I'm sure glad that you're not dead yet. We welcome you to our conference and to Andrews University. We look forward to how you're going to get our minds going and our thoughts going. Thanks for coming.
Thank you. Thanks for that wonderful introduction. It's delightful. It's a real privilege to be here. I will tell you that my first impression, I've never been to this campus before, and just by virtue of being located in Michigan, I lived in Michigan for 6 years. Well, seeing this campus isn't quite what I expected. You have the most wonderful diversity of people here. I was expecting the Midwest, white Midwest. And my own conviction is that to the degree that we can reverse Babel and bring the people groups together and manifest the one new humanity that there is in Christ and all of its beautiful diversity, that itself is an intrinsic God-glorifying kingdom thing. And you guys are doing about as good as I've ever seen it done. It's just a thing of beauty, and I applaud you. It's beautiful. It's an honor to be here. So the title of this is The Danger. Oh, I'm supposed to explain about the Not Dead Yet. Okay, so here's the thing. I've lived in community with this group of folks for about 20 years. We're a really tight-knit group. We've just shared life together. And about 12 years ago, all the guys in this group, it's 4 couples, we realized that we used to be musicians. We used to play in rock bands. So we decided, you're going to go through a midlife crisis anyway. Well, this is a healthy way to do it. And so we started jamming in my basement. And we were terrible. But we were having a lot of fun. And I went out and bought an old set of drums, and we just got some equipment together. Well, we learned a couple songs, and then one of the folks in the group had a son who got married, and he wanted us to play at the reception. So we played at the reception. And then somebody there who owned a club liked us and said, I'd like to play at the club. And that's where we got the idea of raising money for these women in Haiti. And 12 years later, here we are. And it's not dead yet because we are not dead yet. We're old, but we're not dead yet. And I just learned last year how to do speed metal drumming, if anyone knows what that is about, which proves, the bass drumming goes like this. And you got to do single stroke roll with one hand, and I have ADHD, by the way. So it's going like this. So it's drumming away. And it proves you can teach an old dog new tricks. There you go. Not that I'll ever play it anyplace, but it just feels good to do something new. Okay, so this is the danger of certainty-seeking faith. Let me start with this. Probably about 20 years ago, I guess it was now, the older you get, the less time means anything. It just collapses all together. I can't tell the difference between what was 2 years ago or 20 years ago. It's just all one. But a long, long time ago, I went to this prayer meeting. It was for a person in my congregation who, tragically, was in his late 20s, came down with brain cancer. And a friend of his was holding this prayer meeting for him. And so I went to this, and there's about 20, 30 other people. We gather in this lady's house, and she gives this little talk, a pep talk, before we start praying. And the pep talk was this. She read some verse, quite out of context, by the way, but some verse, and she says, if we will just believe with certainty that Brian will be healed, well, then God will heal him. If we don't waver, then he will be healed. But if we waver, well, then he might not. And so we start this prayer meeting. And I'm trying not to waver, but my head starts getting screwed up here because I'm wondering how do you make yourself certain about something that you can't be certain of? I'm not certain he's going to be healed. I know people have been prayed for who haven't been healed. And even if I was certain, how do I know that everybody else in the room is certain? How can I possibly be certain of that? So I'm being asked to be certain. I felt like the Wizard of Oz, the lion on the Wizard of Oz. You know, when he's like saying, I do believe, I do believe, I do believe, I do. I was like trying to talk myself into this belief, and it struck me as a gimmick. It was silly. It was pointless. Now that maybe is kind of an extreme example, but this assumption that your faith is as strong as you are doubt-free is really common. It's widespread. There was a guy in the first church I ever was a pastor at in grad school, Brother Jacobson. And he used to stand up and give a testimony every Sunday night service, and it was always the same. But one of the things that he would say is that I've never doubted the Bible. My faith in the Bible has always been unwavering. It is strong. And people talk like this. Oh, they have such a strong faith. They never question anything. They just believe it. The assumption is that your faith is as strong as you are certain. It seems to me as I was in that prayer room that I began to think, what kind of God would leverage the health, the healing of a young man on how certain you can make yourself? It struck me as a kind of an Al Capone God, a God who was holding a guy hostage. He's got a gun to his head saying, listen, either you make yourself certain that I won't shoot him or I'm going to shoot him. Think about it. Well, how can I be certain you're not going to shoot him? Boom, we're going to lose him. And it's a psychological concept. It's an understanding of faith that is psychological in nature. It's about seeking a feeling of psychological certainty. And it has all sorts of negative ramifications. A lady came up after a service of mine about 2 years ago, I guess, but it could have been 20. What do I know? But she said to me, she goes, Pastor, and she was really intense, kind of anxious, saying, Pastor Boyd, I don't know if I'm really saved. And I said, well, why? And she says, well, can I be honest with you? I go, no, lie to me. No, of course, be honest. And she says, well, you see, I have a master's degree in English, and a few of the stories in the Bible strike me that maybe they're folklore, not literal history. So I'm not sure that that's literal history. Am I still saved? And I just think it was tragic that this lady is raising a legitimate question from an informed background, and she thinks that her salvation is in jeopardy. The common assumption out there is something like this. You ever been to a state fair or something where they have I think they call them strength testers, where you have to hit the thing on the bottom and it sends this puck up to the top, and if you hit the bell, you're really strong. You've seen that thing? And so you want to see how far up you can hit the puck? Just like that. Well, This concept of faith is a little bit like that. You have to get a requisite amount of certainty in order to have certain things happen. Maybe if you get that faithometer, it's a faithometer, and if you get that faith puck up to 50%, well, that will clear you for salvation. Okay, you're in, all right? But that's about it. But if you can get that faith puck up to 75%, well, now you're starting to work in blessing land. Now God will find you parking spaces. Now, you're going to find things going well. The girl you're going to ask out is going to go out with you. You're in the blessing zone. But if you can get that faith puck up to 90%, well, now you're in the Miracleville. Now you can pray and people get healed and you start to see some really cool stuff. If you can get that puck up to 100%, whoa, well, now you can move those mountains and bam, you're going to be walking on water and changing water into wine. Maybe not that one, but walking on water for sure. So it's faith-o-meter. So people try to make themselves certain because they want to get that blessing. They first want to be saved and then they want to get that blessing. The biblical concept of faith, and I'll come back to this at the end of my talk, but the biblical concept of faith is not that. Folks in biblical times were not as into their heads as we modern people are. The biblical concept of faith is a covenantal concept. It's a relational concept, not a psychological concept. And I'll get to that at the end. What I want to do now is just give as many reasons as times will allow to show that this modern psychological concept is dangerous and unbiblical. And I'll see through, I've got, I think, 6 or 7 points here. We'll see how far I get before we got to turn the corner on something. But here's the first thing. Certainty-seeking faith messes with people's head. It screws up people's head. This guy that we prayed for, 28-year-old man, the Lord said there was light, and there's light. Ah! All right, now you can see my pretty face all the better. Well, he ended up being healed. And that's hard enough. Having to die when you're fairly newly married, you've got 2 children, toddlers, that's hard enough. But what made it even harder is that he, for a long while, thought it was his fault. Why? Because he couldn't get the faith puck high enough. If he bought this idea that if I just have enough faith, I'll be healed, so it must be my fault that I'm dying. It messes with people's head. I had a lady who came to our church from a different church that really taught this model of faith with a vengeance. And her thing was that she gave birth to a severely deformed and mentally challenged baby. And in the context that she was in, they saw that as being a sign that she lacked faith or had sin in her life. The assumption is that if you have enough faith and have no sin in your life, well, then you'll have a healthy baby. So that was bad. But then she would be praying for the baby to be healed, and that didn't happen, so then she thought it would continue to be her fault, blaming herself. And her husband had gotten out of this kind of thinking, and I tried as best I could to get her to change her assumptions about what faith is all about, but she lived in this tormented place to the point where she finally took her life. This stuff does damage to people. And maybe if it's not that severe, it could be something like this. The folks who think that the reason they didn't get the job was because they're lacking faith. And the reason that things aren't going their way, the reason that they're getting sick, it's because they don't have enough faith. Or the reason they got in a car crash, or what have you, they suspect that maybe it's because they're not walking in the blessing zone. They're not walking in a high enough level of faith. So it messes with people's heads. Secondly, certainty-seeking faith presupposes an ugly picture of God. As I said before, what kind of God bases your salvation or your healing or the healing of your baby on how psychologically certain you can make yourself? It is, frankly, an Al Capone kind of image of God. Holding people's salvation or healing or their kids' healing hostage, demanding that you do this gimmick where you make yourself certain of something. And what is so virtuous about being able to make yourself certain of something? What's virtuous about that? To be frank, the people who are good at that tend to be people who are rather dull or very delusional. They're good at that. They can convince themselves of anything. And the people who tend to be bad at that are the people who tend to be inquisitive, curious, intelligent, and ask a lot of questions. But this is why folks who are inquisitive, who ask questions, who are bright, often feeling alienated in church because they're not supposed to ask those kind of questions because it makes people doubt. And it presupposes an ugly picture of God. I believe that your picture of God, your mental picture of God, is the most important thing in your life. The most important thing that happens between your two ears is what is your picture of God. Because your relationship with God is mediated through your mental picture of God. The degree to which you're going to love God is going to depend on how lovable is the God that you picture. It affects your relationship. The beauty of your life will never outrun the beauty of the God that you envision. And my conviction is that all of our thinking about God, our image of God, should be anchored in the person of Jesus Christ. Because Hebrews tells us that God in the past spoke in various ways and various glimpses, but in these last days, he's spoken through his own Son, who is the exact representation of his being. He's the radiance of his glory, the shininess of his shining. When God shines, it looks like Jesus. And he's the exact representation, no more approximation. This is exactly what God is like, his very being. And the author uses this word hypostasis, which means essence. This reveals what God is like down to his very essence. That's why he's called the Word of God, and he's the one and only image of God, and he's the only one way, truth, and life to God. He says, if you see me, you see the Father, John 14:7-9. So keep your eyes fixed on Jesus. That is what God looks like, giving his life for us on the cross. That's the kind of God that we worship. Everything hangs on the beauty of your picture of God. But see, Jesus never, ever blamed anyone for having the affliction they had. Throughout his ministry, he's ministering to people in afflicted situations, but never once does he say, well, the reason you're this way is because you've got this sin in your life, or because you don't have enough faith, or what have you. He never blamed them. In fact, he treats them like victims. In fact, the word that is used for afflictions in the Gospels, it's kind of an interesting word. At least sometimes they use the word mastix, which literally means flogging. They saw these ailments as floggings of the devil. These people are under oppression. That's why Peter could summarize Jesus' whole ministry in Acts 10, verse 38, by saying Jesus went about doing good, healing people, freeing them from Satan's oppression. So Jesus treated these people as victims, never as though this was their own fault. And he never asked people to try to convince themselves of stuff. You remember that one episode where he meets a guy who doesn't have any eyes. He's just got sockets there. It's one of the strangest stories in the Gospels. Because Jesus then spits on the ground and makes some mud and puts them in the sockets. And then he prays for the guy. And then he asks the guy, can you see? The guy says, well, kind of, but I see people walking around, they look like tree stumps. So he must have been able to see at some point. He lost his eyesight. They look like tree stumps. And I'm thinking it's probably because he's got that mud in his eyes. Who could see right with all that mud there? I mean, crying out. And Jesus doesn't go, hey, where's your faith? You need to confess that you have been healed. If you're just certain that you have been healed, then you will be healed. He doesn't do that. He wants the guy to be honest. The guy says, I'm not totally healed yet, so he just does it again. This is the kind of God we serve. This is the kind of Lord that Jesus is, and it conflicts with this idea that we're supposed to convince ourselves of stuff in order to get the healing. Third thing is this: certainty-seeking faith is inherently irrational. The rational way, the only way to assess any truth claim, is to weigh it, pros and cons, which means you have to doubt it. If you go to a used car lot, and there's a guy there, and he wants to sell you this car. Looks kind of like a jalopy, but he wants $15,000 for it or something. And he tells you the engine runs great, and it's all, I don't know a thing about cars, so I shouldn't use car analogies, but I always do. So it's got great pistons and turbocharged crankshaft, axle rods. I don't know. It's really, really, really good. Well, so it's worth $15,000. I would hope that you would not just try to convince yourself that it's true. No, you doubt that. You'd say, well, maybe I need to try it out. And if you don't know anything about mechanics like I don't, then you call a buddy and get over here and check out the engine and look under the hood and look under the axles and check out the spark plugs or whatever you do when you check out cars. So you test it, right? The one thing you wouldn't do is, gosh, I'm going to believe him. I'm going to make myself certain that he's telling you the truth. That's not a rational way to make a decision. The rational way is to assess things, going back and forth. It's always, get this, it's always irrational to try to convince yourself or to make yourself feel more certain than the evidence warrants. Reasonable people don't do that. And this is why this model of faith drives a lot of intelligent, rational people out of the church or keeps people from considering the gospel. It's just an irrational thing. God never asked us to be irrational. Look at this. In the Bible, he encourages us to think, to use our mind. He says, come now, let us reason together. The Lord says to the Israelites. He says, present your case. Set forth your arguments. He wants us to use our brains. That's why he gave them to us. In the Gospel of Luke, it says that Jesus gave many convincing proofs to people that he had, in fact, risen from the dead. He didn't just say, just try to convince yourself it's true. No, he gave reasons to believe it's true. And faith always goes beyond the evidence, but it should never go against it. He gives us reasons to accept what he says as being true. Jesus frequently encouraged people to carefully search out the truth and to rationally consider all matters, constantly doing that. Think for yourselves. And Jesus says, love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind. And what the mind is wired to do is think. When we are honestly and intently thinking about things, it's a form of worship. I consider theology where we're trying to think about God and line things up. That is a form of worship. We're to worship him with all of our soul, all of our body, all of our mind. He wants us to use our brains. And so our level of confidence in something should be based on reasonable considerations. Because if what you're believing is true, you shouldn't need to hide it from anything, right? It should be able to stand up to whatever else is out there. Fourth thing, certainty-seeking faith is not, now this is a weird one, but follow me on this. It's not concerned with truth. The only way to determine whether something is true is to doubt it and to test it, to check it out, to weigh the pros and cons. And the more important a decision is, the more you want to check it out. So, several years ago, my wife and I, and this group that we share life with, we were going to buy a fourplex and move in together. It's been a plan of ours for a while. And so there was this fourplex on our block. 12 years ago, we all decided to move in from the suburbs, and we moved into the city. So we're all living in the same street in the city, and we were going to move into the same house, kind of a little commune deal. And we're all excited about this. And there's this house that looked perfect. It looked really, really good. They wanted a little more money than we would hope for, but it was worth going for. And we're all set to buy the thing, but we did one last thing before we bought it, and that is you hire somebody to come and do a walkthrough to check out everything. And this guy went and walked all through the house and checked out plumbing, checked out all the stuff you check out when you check out a house, because I don't know anything more about checking out houses than I do about cars. But he spent a lot of time doing it, and cost us $400 to do it, but boy, it was worth it, because this house, it turns out, needed over $100,000 of fixing. And so as much as we wanted to get this fourplex, we decided we couldn't. Now, that was a rational way to go about buying a house. And because there's a lot of money on the line and a lot of our future on the line, we're going to check it out thoroughly and hire a specialist to do it. The one thing that wouldn't be rational, it wouldn't be rational to just close our eyes and say, we like it so much, we're just going to believe that it needs no fixing. It's in good shape because they told us it was in good shape. We're going to believe it's in good shape. We're going to believe that it's ready to go. We're going to believe that it doesn't have a lot of repairs to be done. No, see that? It's always irrational to try to convince yourself of having a certain kind of confidence that goes beyond what the evidence actually warrants. So what are we to make of a whole subculture of Christians in which they think it's virtuous to convince themselves that what they believe is true and that God is pleased with that? What it means is that they're more interested in the feeling of believing that what you believe is true, that feeling of certainty. They're more interested in that than they are in determining whether or not what they believe is true. See this? If you're concerned that what you believe is true, you have to check it out. If you're concerned just to feel certain that you already believe everything is true, well, then you aren't concerned that what you're believing is true. So here's how I put it on Twitter a while ago. It says like this. The situation is like this. You can be concerned with the truth of what you believe, or you can be concerned with feeling certain that you already believe, that what you believe already is true, but you cannot be concerned with both at the same time. The two concerns are contradictory. They fly in the face of one another. See, with that model in mind, Nietzsche one time said this. He goes, faith, here's the definition, not wanting to know what is true. That's how Nietzsche defined faith. And unfortunately, if the model of faith that he's talking about is the certainty-seeking model of faith, he's absolutely right. You can either be concerned that what you believe is true, or you can be concerned with feeling certain that what you believe is true, but you can't do both at the same time. It's to prefer a pleasant feeling of certainty, which we all like, that feeling of being right. But we're preferring that over the quest for truth, which always involves cognitive dissonance. And cognitive dissonance can sometimes be kind of discomforting. I've gone through several periods in my life where I've had to dismantle my whole faith in light of new things I found and criticisms I found or whatever. And it's never a pleasant experience. It's kind of painful. And the more important your faith is to you, the more painful it is. But see, if we don't allow ourselves to experience some of that cognitive dissonance, well then we're really making an idol out of our feeling of certainty. Here's what scientists have found, neurologists have found this. They have taken people who are passionate about religion and politics, and they present to them alleged facts that disagree with their beliefs. And they find invariably that when people who are passionate about a certain conviction confront facts that disagree with them, their prefrontal lobe cortex almost completely shuts down. That's the part of your brain that does all the rational thinking. It shuts down. And their amygdala, which is your fight or flight reflex, it's your reptilian brainstem, it gets activated and starts sending chemicals throughout your body that makes you either want to punch the guy or run away. And then they found that when people are passionate about religion and politics, when they're presented with facts that agree with them, well, the prefrontal lobe cortex shuts down almost as completely. There's very little activity there. And now the pleasure centers of the brain get activated. It feels so good. You see, we don't like to confront stuff that's going to challenge our faith. But it's the only way to ever know that what you're believing is true and be able to believing it in a rational way and to be able to share that with others. Otherwise, whatever you believe, you just got lucky. You know, you just inherited the right system. Lucky you. But everyone thinks that about themselves, so maybe you better test it. This, by the way, explains what's going on in our culture. Because see, here's the thing. If we choose to always have the pleasure centers of our brain activated by always just talking to people who agree with us and always just reading books that agree with us, you know, patting each other on the back, well then what happens is we begin to lose the capacity to enter into the world of those who disagree with us. And since they activate our amygdala, we can just get angry at them, you see? And this is what's happening in this country all along we are increasingly becoming polarized because here's what's happened. And I'm not going to give a little political stump speech here, but permit me a little detour because this is insightful, I think. Maybe. We'll see. You vote. Okay, so here's the thing. Not too long ago, everyone had to have the same news source. You know, we only had 3 stations on television, and it was in their interest and the interest of newspapers to try to be as unbiased as possible to get as big an audience as possible. So we had a relatively neutral source. Now, with cable television and stuff, everyone can get their own version of reality. You have Fox News, you have MSNBC, and a lot of other things in between. And since people like to get their pleasure centers activated, guess what they watch? The version of the world that agrees with them, whether it's liberal or whether it's conservative. So guess what happens? They lose their capacity to even understand how other people think. So guess what happens? They start getting more and more animosity towards one another. If they really cared, they'd think the way we do. They don't really care. Or if they had any intelligence, they'd think the way we do. They obviously are stupid. Those are your 2 options in politics. You either don't care as much as I do, or you're just dumb. And so now we have this stuff going on where candidates are calling each other names for crying out loud. That was unheard of even a few years ago. Lord help our country. It's in bad shape. Whatever happens to the country happens to the country, but it must never happen to us. Because we're called to serve the world. We must always know how the world thinks. We must always be able to get inside people's head, understand where they're coming from, have respectful, intelligent, loving conversations. Paul says in 1 Corinthians 16:14, one of my favorite verses. He says, do everything in love. Everything in love. And love, remember, in the New Testament, 1 John 3:16, love is defined by the cross. Here is how we know what love is. Jesus Christ loved us and gave his life for us. That's how we know what love is. So everything you do should reflect the kind of love that was revealed on Calvary. Everything. And so I always tell people, if you find yourself in a discussion, whether it's religion or politics, theology, what have you, if winning the argument becomes more important than expressing love towards the person, do the kingdom of God a favor and shut up. Okay, just walk away. Take a deep breath. Get into that love place again and then come back. If you ever find yourself getting, that amygdala is getting activated, you just want to, I'm going to hit you in a pacifist kind of way. No, it's time to silence it and go back to the drawing board. All right. Fifth thing is this. Certainty-seeking faith breeds narrow-mindedness. And I just touched on this. What happens is, and I've seen this happen, if feeling certain is what makes you feel special before God and saved and walking in a blessing zone, then you can easily develop a learning phobia. A learning phobia because you'll be afraid to read stuff or engage with people who might shake your certainty. And so folks who have this model of faith very frequently tend to get isolationist. They only read the books that agree with them. They only talk to the people that agree with them. If they do read any other books, it's only to get ammunition against the views. They're not genuinely trying to enter into the position of the book. Or if they dialogue with people who disagree with them, they're not genuinely trying to understand their perspective. They're just gaining ammunition to prove that they're right. As the person's talking, in your brain you're going, oh yeah, well I'm going to say this. Oh, as soon as they shut up, oh, I'm going to argue with this. Oh, I can checkmate them with this argument. We're not really hearing because we're talking in our heads. Husbands and wives do this too, by the way. For different reasons. And then what happens is having lost the capacity to enter into the worldview of another, you can just accuse them. You always attribute bad motives to them. Because if they really were intelligent and really cared, they'd agree with me. It's like the Pentecostal church I was saved in when I was 17. They had a certainty-seeking model of faith. And anyone who didn't agree with them, there had to be, there's a moral reason for it. Because no one who is really sincere could possibly read the Bible and come up with a different interpretation than us. So they wanted to run from the truth. They didn't really want the truth. They're hiding some sin in their life. And then anyone in the church who would start to question anything, well, they must have some sin in their life. So I started going to the University of Minnesota and very quickly had a lot of questions. As one night I went to, my major question was, how can we believe the Bible is the Word of God when the Gospels seem to have all these contradictions? And I had, for 4 days, prepared this chart. I had this huge chart. I get obsessive about things once in a while. And so I charted all the places where, events were out of order or sayings were different, or there was one angel over here, but this gospel author says there's two. And I had it color-coded to make it simple for him. It was this big chart on all the problems in the Gospels. So I went over to my pastor's house and I put it on his kitchen table. And then I went through each one. I just went on and on about what are we going to do here? What about this? What about this? What about this? And when I finally got done, he looks at me. He says, well, Greg, I'm not sure about all that, but one thing I know is that no one questions the Word of God unless there's something going on. Greg, have you been inappropriate with young ladies? It's like, what? Can we talk about the issue? And no, by the way, no. But can we talk about the issue? He even got more explicit than that, but I'm going to remain decent and not tell you what he said. But really, this is the issue here. Explain this. And we never got beyond that. You have moral sin in your life. It's just, no, folks, it's so important that, see, if Christians have a reputation for being intolerant and narrow-minded, and they do, by the way, Barna polls have shown this thing, the reputation is being intolerant, judgmental, and narrow-minded. Well, this is why. If we retreat into a little subculture and only talk to ourselves and only think among ourselves and pat ourselves on the back because we're the people who believe all the right things as opposed to all the people who believe the wrong things, and we do the right things and they do the wrong things, well then what happens is we just become narrow-minded. We become intolerant. We lose the capacity to, in creative and fruitful ways, engage with the culture, the way Jesus did. He had a capacity to talk to all sorts of different kinds of people, from different backgrounds. But we lose that if we retreat and just listen to ourselves talk. The sixth thing then is this, and this is the final thing. Certainty-seeking faith can be dangerous. It can be very dangerous. People who never allow themselves to doubt what they believe are capable of doing incredibly evil things against those they disagree with. You lose your capacity to question and to think for yourself, so you blindly obey authorities. I mean, don't you just wish that those Islamic terrorists who drove planes into the World Trade Center on 9/11, wouldn't it have been nice if they would have questioned a little bit of what they were told? If they would have doubted some of the claims that were being made? For years, they've just been convinced that if they do this deed, they get 72 virgins when they go to heaven. Wouldn't it have been nice if they would have maybe wondered about that? How do they know that's true? Are there good grounds for believing this claim? But see, it's not just with Muslims. I mean, most of the killing done in the world is done out of people who feel certain about their causes. Think about it. And the Christian church is as guilty of this as is the Islamic tradition. Here's one example. Between 1618 and 1684, Catholics and Protestants throughout Europe were massacring one another over political and religious disputes. It was called the 30 Years' War. Half of the male population in Germany was killed in that period. 25 to 40% in various areas of Europe lost their population due to this war. It was absolute bloodbath nonstop. 11 million people ended up being killed in this 30 Years' War, and that is at a time when the total population of the earth was only 500 million. So that war actually had a higher percentage per capita of deaths than World War I or World War II. And it was all done by Christians killing other Christians. So wouldn't it have been great if some of these folks would have just questioned their authorities? They're told to go out and kill because the ruler says kill, and they deserve to die. And so they just do it. But wouldn't it have been nice if someone said, well, on what basis does our ruler make this claim? And that this is a just war that we should be fighting? Or wouldn't it have been nice if some of these folks who are professing Christians would have said, I wonder how this can be reconciled with Jesus' teaching to love our enemies and to turn the other cheek and to bless our enemies and to do good to our enemies and to pray for them. Is there any incompatibility with this, I wonder? When Jesus said love your enemies, did that rule out killing them? I'm just curious. It would be nice if someone would have asked the question, if they would have worshiped God with their mind. Sadly, this is the sad history of our world. Rulers decide they want to do something in war, and they enlist young people, and they just brainwash them to believe that your country is the right country, always stands for the right causes, is always about the right purposes, always killing the right people for the right reasons. You'll do it for God and country. And try not to notice the fact that 99% of the other people on the other side are thinking the exact same thing. Is it a coincidence that everyone happens to be willing to kill and die for whatever place they were born into and raised in and indoctrinated in? Can we notice this? Yet most kids ever doubt the truth of what they're told. We just know that we're right and they're wrong, and we're good and they're evil, and for God and country. When a little doubting would have saved millions and millions of lives. I wonder if we'd fight any wars if folks on both sides were willing to question and ask. I mean, how many soldiers really know about the intricacies of what's going on behind a particular battle or a particular war? Is this a justified war? Experts who study this stuff don't even agree. And yet, you're supposed to be certain enough to kill somebody for and certain enough to be willing to die for. The final thing I'll say, I thought that previous one was final, but this is the final thing. This is my final thing, all right? Well, it's not quite. It's my pre-final thing. All right. Certainty-seeking faith is idolatrous. It's idolatrous. Folks, we are created to get our life, and by that I mean our core worth, our core significance, our core identity, our core security. We're to get that out of our relationship with God through Jesus Christ. That core needs supposed to be met through that means, and He's the only one who can meet that. But what can easily happen is that if we're not getting out of that relationship, well, instead of getting our life from God, we start to get our life from what we think about God, from how certain we are, from how right we are. Religion is the all-time great idol. We're special because we believe all the right things, and we're loved by God, and we're saved because we are certain that we are right on these things and they're wrong. Those people do the wrong things and do the wrong things. Really, if you think about it, it presupposes a God as sort of this very uptight theology prof, who's in life is one big theology test. And so on the judgment day, you're going to get there, and if you answer the questions right, you get in. If you answer them wrong, boom, you are gone. Is that really what God's like? I mean, in the church I was first saved in, we thought if a person wasn't baptized with the exact right words said over them, they're gone forever. In this church, they believe that means you're going to fry forever. Because the wrong words were said over you. And I remember thinking, gosh, Jesus gives his life for this person, and this person loves him, And then on the judgment day, the Lord's going to say, hey, I loved you and gave my life for you, and I know you love me, but there is this technicality. The wrong words were said over you. Pow! Go to hell forever, fry. It just didn't I began to question that belief, and I'm really glad I did. I began to doubt that whole thing. We're supposed to find our joy in our relationship with God, not our beliefs about God. Our life, our joy, our security is to be found in that. We're supposed to find security trusting in God's character, not trying to convince ourselves that we can trust that we have all the right answers to things. We're to let God be our God and not make a God out of our certainty. And when we do this, we're making an idol of our beliefs. I love one thing that Karl Barth said when asked, what was the question? Something about hell. But he said this, that the deepest crevice of hell, which he was speaking half facetiously here, but the deepest crevice of hell, or the hottest place of hell, is reserved for theologians who love their theology more than their God. Warning to theologians. Ooh. So folks, that's the problem with the certainty-seeking faith. It's idolatrous. The biblical concept of faith is relational and covenantal. It's not a psychological concept. It's not an attempt to get free of doubt. Biblical faith is rather a willingness to make a commitment in the face of doubt. It's a commitment to trust another and to be trustworthy in relationship to another. Your degree of psychological certainty isn't an issue, as long as you're confident enough to make the commitment to walk in a certain way, to be trustworthy and to trust the other person. The main analogy, or one of the main analogies for our relationship with God in the Bible is a marriage covenant. Yahweh is the bridegroom, and God's people are the bride. And so it's good to think about our relationship with God along the lines of a marriage. Now, when I was going to get married, just before I was going to say I do, there was a miscommunication between the person who was running the wedding and the organist, or the piano player. And we had the longest song. It went on forever, this prelude. It was the song Homecoming, and it went on. I love that song, but after 20 minutes, I hated it. It was like someone going on, because the piano player wasn't getting the cues. So I was backstage with my guys with way too much time to think. and they began to think, what am I doing? Maybe she got cold feet. Maybe that's why maybe I should get cold feet. I'm about ready to sign my life away to somebody. I'm a pretty happy person, and now I'm going to give them the right to make me miserable. How much do I really know about this person? Your mind starts racing. I think too much anyways, but I'm just racing. Now those, as soon as I got out there, I was nervous, but as soon as I got out there and I saw my gorgeous, drop-dead gorgeous wife, all doubts faded in this hormone-raging experience I was having. Takes care of a lot of doubt. She's gorgeous. But see, here's the thing. At the wedding ceremony, the point is to say, I do. Are you willing to commit? Are you willing to commit? It would be totally inappropriate to get out a faithometer, like I talked about before, and to try to measure the psychological certainty. No, as long as you're confident enough to say, I do. Look at the reasons. There's pros and there's cons. And you do that before you get married. You better do that before you get married. Weigh the pros and the cons. And if you're confident enough, then you say, I do. But you can't be certain. And it would be stupid to make yourself certain. Be as confident as the relationship with the person warrants, but don't try to talk yourself into more of that, because maybe you're not supposed to. And I'm sorry if there's some people who are going to get married in 2 weeks, and here I am saying you can't be certain. I know you feel certain. That's the hormones talking. No. Look at it. No, and maybe they're a God-given gift to empower us to say I do when otherwise we wouldn't. But, here's the thing. Sometimes, not in your case for sure, but sometimes people put their best foot forward and keep a lot of stuff hidden. It's called the peacock syndrome. Look at me. And you put out your pretty flowers and your pretty feathers. And we all do this, right? When you're dating, you act just a little more stealthy than you actually are, a little more cutesy than you actually are. And you certainly don't put your dirty laundry out. In the name of honesty, you might give them a little tidbit, but it's not the whole. Okay, so when you get married, you're not sure all that you're getting into. And then people sometimes change. I hate to tell you, but sometimes I've seen some things where, man, when they get married, they're so nice and great and godly and whatever, and then they just go south. You want to believe you're going to live happily ever after, but sometimes it doesn't happen. Or sometimes life experiences just happen where the person gets a stroke or whatever. You can't be certain you're going to live happily ever after. But you're confident enough to say, I do. That's what biblical faith is all about, and that's the relationship. God, I think, gives us really good reasons to say, I do. And that's what salvation is. It's simply saying, I do, to God's marriage proposal, which was given to us on the cross. That's He's saying, will you marry me? And when we surrender to him and make him Lord of our life, we're saying, I do. And so you go on walking a certain way. I think we've got good reasons. I've weighed this thing many, many times. I feel I have way more reasons to trust in him and to base my life on this than I do to base it on anything else, including doing nothing, because that is still basing it on something. You're making your truth claim about life. I'm walking this way. And as I walk this way, I'll admit that there's times where I feel absolutely certain. God's more real to me than this podium right here. But that feeling sometimes is there and sometimes it's not. I'm not suggesting we should always try to doubt. Okay, there's a time for everything. No, as you walk with God, the questions kind of change. They become more insider questions. But I'm simply saying this. As you walk with God, never feel like you need to shut down your brain. Never feel like you have to pretend that you don't have a doubt that's really there. Never be afraid to ask questions. If what you're believing is true, you've got nothing to fear, right? And so it should be able to stand up to scrutiny of everything that's out there. And if you find yourself trying to convince yourself, talk yourself into it, you're just avoiding cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is not pleasant, but it is a growing thing. And that happens when you get married too, by the way, folks. There's going to be some bumps and ups and downs. I never thought I'd be telling you about marriage here tonight, but I'm going politics, marriage, you're getting everything tonight. Man, and with no extra charge either, so you're lucky. But there'll be times you'll question, and just follow that through. I have found, and I'll close with this, there are times when I face new stuff where I have to rethink everything. I had to dismantle my whole, I one time had to step out of the ministry for 3 months. Just to ask, what do I really believe? What am I believing just because I'm supposed to, because I'm part of this church? And what do I really believe? Because I've read a lot, I've thought a lot, I've changed some. And so I had to tear it all down and say, okay, why do I believe in God? Why do I believe in Jesus? Why do I believe in the Bible? And just kind of build that back up. I talk about that in my book, A Benefit of the Doubt, by the way. Kind of reconstructing your faith from the center on out. I've always found that I've grown because of the times I've been willing to ask the questions and experience the pain of cognitive dissonance. But what I know for sure is it's unhealthy to not do that. Love God with all your mind, which means keep on thinking. All right, Pastor Jose, right? Yeah, the prophet Hosea will now come forward and prophesy. God bless you guys. Thanks for having me.